Okay, so this is going to be the first in a series of Hueforge tutorials that I'm going to be carrying out. Basically, just to show you how I create the images that I create. Specifically, certain filaments like matte filaments, how the model geometry or how to create the model geometry in order to get those filaments to blend with them having such a low transmission distance. This is going to be a basic tutorial, mainly for people that are just starting out in Hueforge, or maybe somebody that's had Hueforge for a while and is struggling to use it. So to start with, you download Hueforge. Obviously, you get the zip folder. You're going to extract that into somewhere, a location on your PC. I've just got it there in a folder called Hueforge, so I'm going to open this up. We'll open the Hueforge folder inside and open the Hueforge application. So this is Hueforge. I'm going to drag a simple grayscale image into here. It's one that I've created on Midjourney. So let's run through the user interface inside Hueforge. At the top here we've got the lighting. This is mainly used for, well, it is used for the lithophane side of things. So Hueforge will create lithophanes that are printed flat down on the bed in the same way as the filament paintings. You can select lithophane on this drop down box here. For today, we're just going to stick to filament painting. I'll run through this section here as we progress through the video. Step height is more just for convenience, so you want to match that to the step height of your printer. So mine is 0.04. So all this will do is, as I flick through these different layer heights, that will move them in 0.04 increments. I tend to print in a 0.04 layer height. I know most people are more comfortable with 0.08, but as you can see here with this stepping, you tend to get a lot smoother blending with 0.04 layer heights. I like to print at a 0.24 base. It just gives me less layers at the beginning of the print. Most of those layers are usually a black layer. There'd just be a black flat layer. So obviously I've got my minimum depth set to 0.36. So those that first layer at 0.24 just all be completely black anyway. On the left hand side here you've got the filament library. So these will show the filaments that you own. So these are all ticked there under the own section. Will also show filaments that you don't own. So you've got unowned filaments. So what this allows you to do is drag some of these filaments in. You can create an image using those filaments. It's kind of like a try before you buy method. So if you take this Polylite Aqua Blue for instance, you could drag that into a few images. You might be getting good results with it, with the TD and the shade of colour that it is, and think, well, do you know what? I'll purchase a spool of that. You could then take that and add that into your own library. So that's the library. To add these to the sliders, it's simply just drag and drop. So you just drag these down, and that will change the slider to that colour. It will display the transmission distance at the top. It also shows you the layer heights. So black, for instance, here will be black up until layer 8 at 0.52 millimeters. So that's the sliders. I'll go into more detail on these as we obviously create this image and get it ready for sending to the printer. On the model geometry side, down on the right hand side here, you've got detail size. So you tend to set this at half the nozzle diameter that you're printing with. So I'm printing with a 0.4 nozzle. So I'm going to have this set at 0.20. The width and height of the model. So that's obviously the model that you're going to generate. So I like to print these around 200 mil. So we'll reset the view here. That resets that back to, obviously, so we can see the full image. Border width, border depth. I'll go into them a little bit later towards the end of creating this image, and we'll stick a border on and just see how that looks. The rest, everything else in here, I'll go through it roughly, but there is a detailed video on the Hueforge YouTube channel that Steve's done. He does a much better job than I could do of explaining what these are. To find that, a quick link to it is click help, and you've got the Hueforge YouTube channel here. So it's this one here, this model geometry. It is a really good video explaining these, so I recommend that you check that out. Close that back down. We've got full range. As Steve explains in his video, what we've actually got here is a maximum depth set at 2.0. You can see here the actual depth of the image is 0.19. So that means that Hueforge isn't currently using the full maximum depth that you've set to create the image. If we look at, we'll click wireframe so we can see this. If we look at the mesh, you can see where the lighter, the white in the image is the raised part. If we click full range, what it'll actually do is extend the image to utilize the full maximum depth that you have set. So we can now see that the actual depth is 2. So we'll untick that. I prefer to work, unless it's needed. I don't normally use full range that often. We'll reset view again and we'll turn the wireframe off. Adjust luminance, adjust zero luminance and transparent. Steve actually we're not going to be doing that today, so I'm not going to go into too much detail with it. And Steve explains that in that model geometry video that I mentioned earlier. No border and negative. Again, negative Steve explains well in that video. No border I'll run through towards the end of this video when we add the border to the image. We've got your minimum depth and your maximum depth, as we ran through a little bit just earlier. The maximum depth, I recommend starting at around 2. You can save this as your defaults, which I'll show you how to do as well. It just kind of gives you a good base starting platform to work with. Minimum depth is the base of the image, so it's the base of the image before the details start to be added. So if you increase this, it will increase the overall thickness of the model or the base of the model, which will give you a much stiffer print. Some of them can be quite floppy. It depends on the use that you want for the image. If you're just going to be mounting it into a frame, then you don't need it to be very thick, and I tend to just leave it. I have this set as a preset at 0.36. You've got static depth. So what these 3 options are here, static depth is it basically treats the highest slider as though it was all the way to the top. So if I move this up, it doesn't make any difference to that later layers, as you can see there on the image. We've got clip depth, which what this does is it clips the top off the image. So if we go in and look again at the mesh, and we can see these raised parts, if I adjust this top slider down, you can see that it crops the top off the image. You can see that happening there. We've got dynamic depth. Now what that does is it allows the top slider dictates the height of the model. So it still works with the maximum depth. So we've got that set at 2. So if we slide this slider up and down, we can see down here, you can see the actual depth is adjusting. So it's adjusting the overall, not just the top, but the overall depth of the mesh from the base upwards. So we can see that obviously it gives us a bit more control over the actual mesh. For this image, we're going to leave it in static depth. We'll turn the wireframe back off, remesh, and we'll reset the view. So sRGB and Legacy, I don't think Steve actually mentions those in the Hueforge video, because he did that video on using an older version of Hueforge. He put these in, leaving those ticked allows me to load older models that are created in the pre-update version. I tend to work with those selected and work with it in legacy mode. So for this image, I'm just going to leave these 2 ticked. We've got adjust amount. I'll leave that at 0.01. It gives me finer control. It just means that any of these values that we change on any of the sliders will move at 0.01 increments. You can adjust that as you please. Steve does explain the brightness compensations and luminance methods in the model geometry video. I'll run through these quickly. So we've got standard. So that's what most lithophane generators use is a standard. So it's standard brightness comp, standard luminance method. You've got max channel. Max channel basically ignores any color that isn't the maximum value. So it uses whichever color has the maximum value and generates the luminance from that. So this can be handy to bring to brighten the image up and bring some of those colors into the image. Combo is it utilizes allows you to scale between the two, so it allows you to scale between standard and max channel. So you get full adjustment on these two sliders, and obviously on the brightness adjust. What that can do is help you dial in the overall brightness. It can help you bring some of those darker colours and details forward from the base of the image as well. You've got smoothing, which if we just go back to standard, we'll leave it on standard combo for this print, darken it up a little bit. If we take a look at the image, some images can be really jagged. I don't tend to use a lot of smoothing on my images. If we take a look at the eyes, for instance, here, that's quite a jagged raised area. Smoothing, as you can see, making slight adjustments to the image there, it just smooths some of those jagged edges and areas out. For this image, I'm not really going to use much smoothing, if any at all. We'll run through that in a later video where it's required. Let's reset the view again, and we'll have a look at creating this image now. So we've got, what I'm going to use is, I'm going to drag I like to use matte filaments for the black. It just doesn't give that shine in the background, so it tends to give a much nicer view on it. I'm going to use a Sunlu PLA Meta White. I've got this down at a transmission distance of 8. If I can find it. So that's here. So this tends to give me, as you can see, the change to the image already. Just with black and white, the image looks really nice. That tends to give me a much better blending. It lets a lot more of those lower layers show through the white. We get a lot more layers of white on top with blending showing through. So we'll also put in Sunlu PLA Plus Grey. And we'll add in a Sunlu PLA Plus Silver. So these are like kind of my go-to colours for any grayscale images that I do. Obviously, you might have different filaments. As long as you've got, I mean, again, like I just said, you can use black and white, purely just those two colours, if you've got a high enough, a white with a high enough transmission distance. But you might, most of the time, I will use a dark grey and a lighter grey in the image. So let's have a look at the maximum depth of this model. I don't tend to actually create, most of my models tend to be between around 1.4 and 1.6, I'd say, most of the time. So we'll drop this down to, let's do 1.5 somewhere in the middle. And we will adjust the, let's drop this down a little bit. So we're on 0.04 layer height, 0.24 base, which is right. Let's just drop this down a little bit. Drop the dark grey down and the light grey. I mean, it already looks pretty good. We'll adjust. What I tend to like to really darken some of these darker areas out. I know obviously you can see a bit of the pattern there and down here, but just for the result of it kind of popping out of the print, I tend to prefer to darken the image, the background especially. We can see here we've got quite good shading around these. It's turned out quite good straight away, that, to be fair. Let's have a little bit of a play with these luminance methods. So you've got bright enhance. What that'll do is it'll bring the base layer up, so it darkens it. Sorry, it enhances the brighter areas, but it'll basically give you, it brings the base upwards, so it gives you an overall thicker print. So we're going to have to move these layers up. The thing that you'll find with this, because these areas are quite bright in this image anyway, it's washing a lot of the lighter areas out. We're losing some of that shading that we had before. So if we try Bright Enhanced 2, it's very similar to Bright Enhanced 1, but it has a much lower base layer. So it gives you a much darker base layer, but it still enhances the light areas. So what we might need to do is drop some of these layers down a little bit. That seems to look a lot better, but I still don't like the way that it's washing out these lighter areas here. I don't feel like we're getting anywhere near as much shading on that part of the image. We've got obviously dim. As you can see for this image, that's not going to work. It's going to be far too dark. We can obviously adjust darkness and adjust the brightness right up, but personally, I feel that defeats the objective. This dim 1 and dim 2 are mostly used for really bright images that you want to dim down a bit. So they're similar to Bright Enhanced 1 and 2, but obviously work in the opposite way. And then you've got Bright Dark Enhanced. There is a little bit of a bug at the minute where you have to untick the negative box for this mode. Steve's going to fix that in a new release. So what this does is it enhances both dark and bright layers, or bright parts of the image, should I say. So there's only certain images where I feel like you're going to need to use this, or it might just be that you've got an image and you want to make that image look a certain way. It does work really well, but I find that, as you can see here, it just looks really blotchy on a lot of these parts, and we are losing a lot of that shading. So for this image, we're going to stay on standard. We'll have to tick this back. Like I said, it will be fixed at a later date. I think that looks pretty good as it is, to be honest. I can't see there being any reason to change anything there. Oh, just quickly go through the sliders here. So they don't have to be in any particular order, as you can see. I've got the lowest slider, black, which is the first slider. I then put a white in, which is the highest slider. We've got the grey and then the silver. They don't have to be in the order that they're going to be put into the print. So basically, if you created an image and you put, I don't know, you've got the black, grey, silver, and then the white on this slider, and you wanted to drag a yellow into here and move that up through the print somewhere, that could be below these sliders or above these sliders, wherever it lands. When you actually save the project and reload it, the Hueforge software will put these in an order for you. But as you're working on it, don't worry too much. You don't have to start moving these around and swapping them over. You'll just end up losing where you're up to in the model. So for now, we'll get rid of the yellow, go back to the grayscale. I did mention the border settings earlier on. So what we're going to do now is we're going to untick no border. So that'll give us a border. We can see that it's gone a little bit weird around the edges. So if we remesh it, it'll bring the border in. Now, the border is working from the last filament. So the last filament, or the highest filament on the sliders, is white. So we're actually getting, obviously, white into that border. I want that border to be black. So we'll look at the actual depth is 1.44. So if we change the border depth, let's say we'll go for 1.6. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring a black into this image. So we'll put another layer of bamboo charcoal matte in there. Put that on this slider here. Push that all the way to the top. Now we can see it's interfering with the top layers of the white, so we just need to push that up a little bit. And there we are. So we've got the black border, and we can see the filament changes here. If we click describe, this gives you a list of filaments used. So you've got, obviously, we have black, matte black going into Sunlu PLA plus grey, which then goes into Sunlu PLA plus silver, then to Meta white, and then back to the matte charcoal. It also shows the swap instructions. So start at charcoal at layer 8, you're going to change to the grey. We're going to run the grey up to layer 12, which is 0.68 millimeters, where we change to silver. We're then going to run that to layer 14 at 0.76mm, where we swap back to the white. And then at layer 32, which is 0.148, we're going to change to charcoal for the rest, which will finish the border off. I did say that I was going to show you how to save your defaults. So basically, when you might have created a few images, you might find that most of your images are around the 2.0 millimeters max depth. what minimum depth works for you. It might just be basically that whenever you drop an image into it, you've got certain values that you want to start with. So, like I recommended, starting at a 2 millimeter max depth. I obviously have minimum depth set at 0.36 for most of the prints. I do adjust this depending on what I'm going to use it for. So you might have seen the clocks that I've been making. Some of those I want to have a thicker minimum depth, so they're obviously a bit more rigid. So when I attach the mechanism to them, they're not obviously flopping around. I'll tend to leave it set at standard brightness comp and combo luminance method. What you can do then is you might even decide that you want to set certain colours in there. So I usually just leave black and white. You can slide that all the way up to the top if you want. What you can do is go up into options and click save defaults. Now what that'll do is every time you open Hueforge up, these will be the default values that you start with basically. You can change them at any time. You can also restore defaults as well. So if we change something, I don't know, we'll change that to 4. We'll change this to 0.4. We might change that to bright enhance 1. If we go options, restore defaults, it'll restore everything back to how we had it. So that's how that works. So let's open the, we need to save this first actually. So we'll go on File, Save Project. And I'm just going to save this as, we'll put it so it comes to the top of the list. We'll put it as A1 grayscale save. Let's minimize this for now. And we're going to open the Bamboo Studio, which is a slicer that I choose to use. I'm printing on a Bamboo X1 Carbon. So create new project, add a file, and I'm already in this folder there, but obviously if we just go to desktop, Hueforge, and we can open project, and that file is there. So we've got A1 grayscale front, which means that it's filament painting, it's front lit. It's 200 by 200, so that's the file that we saved. We're going to open this. I'm going to change, it's already set, but if it's not, I will change the filament to your first colour, which is black. I'll run through some settings here. So we had the layer height in Hueforge set at 0.04, but we had the first layer set at 0.24, so let's change that. I'll leave all the line widths default. What I do change is this slice gap closing radius. I set this to 0. Now, what I've found this tends to do, and I don't know if it's just a Bamboo Studio issue, but when you actually insert images where you have quite a deep area that has the base layer showing through, so it might be, there are some prints that I've done that have like birds in the sky, so that's a really white area, but the bird is black, so it's really recessed in, and for some reason, if you have that slice gap closing radius too high, it tends to bridge over. It doesn't fill it completely. It bridges the white over at the top, which throws up an error of floating regions. So I found that the best way to get rid of that is to just set this at 0. It doesn't make any difference to anything else. I'll leave the wall generator classic. If you're doing a print that's got writing in or lots of small detail, then you might find that you want to put that on Arachne, but it works just fine for me on classic. I don't tend to change anything else on there. On strength, I've got it set to 1 wall loop. I have monotonic for top and bottom surface patterns. I've left the top shell layers to 9, which was stock. I have actually saved my own profile here for filament painting, but I started off with the stock 0.08, which I think was the fine setting. What I have done, even though I've got the sparse infill set to 100% rectilinear, I've actually set bottom shells to 999. Obviously that works just like 100% infill, but I just prefer to use that. I find that it works best for me. I have all these unticked, so I've got detect narrow internal solid infill turned off. I have ensure vertical shell thickness turned off as well. Speed. Now this is one thing. If you're printing at 0.04 on the bamboo, I found its acceleration across long strokes on the print tends to cause like a resonance pattern or like a rippling in the surface. So these are settings that I've changed, and it prints flawlessly first time every time now. So you've got outer wall 200, inner wall 200. I've got sparse infill, internal solid infill, and top surface set to 150. And then I have gap infill set to 200. You can untick overhangs. It does. There's no overhangs in the prints, but I don't find it makes any difference when I leave that on. I have got the prime tower disabled. I don't use it for this type of print. I don't find it causes any issues, and it just saves me a little bit of time. If you want to use it, that's entirely up to you. So I've already preloaded the filaments in that I'm using for the print. So we've got the bamboo PLA matte black, we've got the Sunlu PLA plus grey and silver, and we've also got the Sunlu PLA Meta white. So let's go ahead and slice this. Now, you're probably fine with Hueforge prints. There's a lot of triangles, so it can take a while. Let's just let that slice. And then I'll go through showing you how I insert the colours and how Hueforge was designed for you to insert the colours through the slider. Okay, so that's finished slicing now. I've unchecked the seams, which just makes it a lot easier for me to see. If I click that back on, you can see you get a lot of the white patches that show you where the seams are. I'm going to uncheck that. We're going to now insert the colour changes that we saw before in Hueforge. So let's just open Hueforge back up. I've closed that down, my mistake. Got A1 grayscale. This is the project that we saved. So we've got click describe again. So we've got charcoal to layer 8, 0.52 millimeters, swap to grey. We've got at layer 12, we're going to change back to silver, and at layer 14, back to white. Layer 31, I'm just going to move this onto the other monitor so I can see it better. Right, so we'll slide this down to 8. So we've got black to 8, and we're going to change to the grey. Slice the print. We've got grey up until layer 12, and then we change to silver. Slice the plate again. Then we have silver up until layer 14. We're going to change that to white. And then if you remember, we put the border on this print. So at layer 31, we need to change back to the charcoal black, which will give us a black border. So we'll change that back to black, slice the plate. And there we have it. So slide this back up. So that's basically the print ready to go. If I drag Hueforge back over here, if we click the normal button at the top, that will show you what the print is supposed to look like in the slicer. So you can actually cross-reference and see, you know, yeah, it looks like I've got those colours in the right place. Right, so we're ready to print. I'm going to hit print, send this to the printer, and I will upload an image of the result at the end of the video.